Hello, welcome to class. This is Educ 111, Introduction to Education. Uh, this is a class of first year, 1.1, and it is week 2. As I said last time, and from what I gave you, we say that the content that you are supposed to know here is the concept of learning, the concept of teaching, teaching and learning processes, learning and learning styles, learning theories and implications for learning, teaching theories, and after that we did an evaluation for you. Now, the definition and meaning of learning. That learning situations are most natural and common in life, and every one of us is learning one thing or the other, although he may not necessarily be aware of it. An individual starts learning immediately at birth, and some psychologists have contended that the brain of a child at birth is empty, is blank. It is considered to be a blank slate, meaning that this child doesn't know anything. I want you to be aware that some psychologists have dispelled this, that we have some learners who are usually born with some knowledge or something that they know. So while approaching a burning stick, a child is burned and he withdraws himself away. He learns to avoid not only burning, but also all burning things. When this happens, we say that the child has learned that if he touches a flame, he will be burned. In this way, the behavior of an individual is changed through direct or indirect experiences. This change in behavior brought about by experience is commonly known as learning. This is the very simple explanation of learning. But a complete understanding of this term needs more clarification and exact definitions. For example, when you go to class and you want to teach your learners, let's say home science, and they don't know probably how to cook tea, what will you do? You will come up with a recipe, you will give them a recipe, they will go through that recipe or you will take them through that recipe, and after that you will follow the recipe in guiding the learners how to prepare tea. And by the end of that lesson, the learners are supposed to be in a position of preparing tea, and not just tea, but delicious tea for somebody like Dr. Wajala to take. Now, when it comes to the definition of learning, I want you people to know that we have various scholars who have defined education or learning. And I gave you the definition of Murphy, 1968, to on page 205. I also gave you the definition of Henry P. Smith in his book of 1962, page 260. We also looked at the definition of Woodworthy in 1945 on page 288. We looked at the definition of Kensley and Carey, 1957, on page 12. Now, we have also given you just numerous definitions. We had the definition of Horrocks, 1967, page 232, and the list continues. If you find time, make sure that you read what they said, each one of them said about learning. You can also look at Crow and Crow 1973 on page 225. Hilgard 1953 on page 3. Kinsley and Curry. You can also look at what Mann said and this one will do. But now, having said that, you will allow me to give you the formal definition. And this is the formal definition. That a more objective and accurate definition of learning that can commonly or that is commonly found in psychology textbooks has been proposed. And this is what I want you people to take. That the more common definition is similar to the following, but it's not limited to that. That learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior brought about by practice or experience. Learners, I don't know if you got it right. As per our class, this is what we are taking. But other than all those that we have said that were given by various people or various scholars in this class, this is what we are taking as our definition, that learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior brought about by practice or experience. Did you hear that? My dear learners, did you hear that? That this is what we are taking as a class. That learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior brought about by practice or experience. And a few things that you need to know out of this are that learning is a process, or learning as a process should be identified and distinguished from the behavior result or the product of the process. Two, that learning does not necessarily produce a change in behavior. The behavior may remain relatively unchanged while there is a change in the effectiveness of the stimuli eliciting it. And lastly, ambiguous words such as practice and experience are replaced by words that more clearly represents what happens during learning. So these are the things that you need to put in mind as you look at the definition of learning. So we have some improvements that have been made on the definition of learning, and you are supposed to be aware of that. What are these improvements that have been suggested? One, that learning is a process by which a relatively stable modification in stimuli response relation is developed as a consequence of functional environment interaction via the senses. And the formal definition of learning describes the process as a relatively permanent change, a relatively permanent change in behavior based on an individual's interaction or experience with its environment. As such, learning is a very or an important form of personal adaptation. Now, allow me to take you through the critical elements of the definition. It's very, very important that I take you through the critical definitions or the critical elements in this definition. And the first one is the behavior change that occurs in all animals, both human and non-human, and is a process of personal adaptation that occurs within the lifespan of each individual to make one's survival more likely. Two, to say that learning is relatively permanent is to emphasize that behavior is flexible and not genetically programmed in form or function. Learning or learned behavior may exist for a lifetime, but may also not appear throughout an individual's life. Very important that experience of or interaction with the environment with that precedes and follows behavior presents the adaptational requirement and consequence of each interaction. An individual placed in a bubble and kept from any contact with variations in stimuli from day to day, it is born, does not learn many behaviors. So the actions of such an organism, in this case, would be very limited. A living creature may barely survive such an existence. Let's expand on each of these critical elements. I think that will assist us. Lamas, I have a problem with my electricity. It is likely to go off any time. But before that, let us look at this expansion of each of the critical elements and the definition. The first one is this: because learning is so intertwined with individual and environment, it is often emphasized as one of the two major forms of biological adaptation. Ontogenic adaptation, the basis of learning, creates behavioral change that is unique for each individual, and the process only occurs within the lifespan of the individual based on that individual's experience with its personal environment or interaction history. This is the contrast to phylogenetic adaptation, which creates the shared features that define all members of each species and thus transfers from one generation to the next via genetic transfer and genetic determination. Stressing individual environment interaction points out the environment brings about change or changes in behavior, just as behavior then brings about changes in the environment. Many psychologists believe that organisms learn to adapt to environment or environmental challenges as well as learning to adapt or change the environment to better meet individual survival and comfort requirements. We both create our environment and are created by our environment. So human beings create environments, and also human beings are created by the environment. So learning is often conceptualized as a form of adaptation, but adaptation includes more learning. Adaptation involves change in an individual's behavioral repertoire that occur in that individual's lifespan, and the change in species, specific behaviors, anatomical structures that are transferred from one generation to the next through genetics. So we also have some scholars, and I told you last time that we have scholars who have looked at this, and this very important scholar, we can't leave out whatever he said. This is Jean Piaget, and this is what Jean Piaget said. According to Jean Piaget, learning is a mental process that depends on perception and awareness, on how new ideas get integrated into the old knowledge database, on how, through reasoning, the entire database gets reorganized, which results in alteration of the mental structures and the creation of new ones with the base definition. Adding to new information is only first part of learning. The whole learning process involves integration, reorganization, and creation of new mental structures. Let us look at the concept of teaching. Now that we have looked at the concept of learning, let us look at the concept of teaching. What is teaching, my dear learners? Teaching is a social process. To define it is very difficult because the teaching influenced by the political and social background of the country. Teaching is influenced by the political and social backgrounds of the country. Here are some to keep in mind. So, according to Cogney, teaching is a form of interpersonal influence aimed at changing the potential behavior of a person. Edmond defined teaching as an interactive process primarily involving classroom talk, which takes place between a teacher and the learner and occurs during certain definable activity. Brabacha defined teaching as an arrangement and manipulation of a situation in which an individual will seek to overcome from one which she or he will learn in the course of doing so. Skinner defined teaching as the arrangement of contingencies of reinforcement, while Ryan defined teaching as being concerned with the activities which relate to the guidance or direction of the learning of others. So, from this, I want to make the definition as my view. In my understanding, then, teaching should be perceived as stimulating, directing, guiding the learner, and evaluating the learning outcomes of teaching, a process that enables the learner to learn on his own. Teaching, therefore, is a systematic inquiry about the ultimate realities in the universe. It is a study of general principles and understanding of all other or all that comes in the range of human experiences. There are two types of teaching. We have formal teaching and informal teaching. Formal teaching is the teaching which is systematic, deliberate, direct, and consciously imparted by a specialist who can be a teacher. While in the formal teaching, is the teaching it is teaching that one gets from outside of the classroom. A teacher is great, and the teaching profession is greatest of all, as it is very noble to impart education to others. So, by teaching, it means to me the following. So, what is teaching? Teaching, let us look at the acronym of the word teaching. So, T stands for transferring knowledge. E, enlighten with the present living condition. A means aligning with the portion and real life. C means the character building. H means healing, touch, and to offer support. I means involvement with the students in studies. N means nurturing the thought into reality. And G, giving a final shape to the content. So, while I want you people to digest what I've said, I want to move and talk about what is the difference between teaching and learning. This is very important. In fact, I've set a question on this. So, this is the most important part in this lesson. What is the difference between teaching and learning? And this one, you will not complete your exam without a question on this. I've given you 2 minutes to relax a bit, to digest whatever we have said. before we continue and talk about this very important subtitle. Okay, 2 minutes break. Mm, let me hope you are back, and I want to talk about the difference between teaching and learning. And this is very important. You will not leave that examination room without meeting this question. This question will be there. So you better listen. How will you answer this? If I ask you, what is the difference between teaching and learning? So I'll expect you to answer that question in the following paragraphs. You must explain the difference between teaching and learning in the following. One, look at the definition. Give us the difference between teaching and learning in terms of definition. Two, in the second paragraph, you will have to give us the difference between teaching and learning in terms of performer. Three, and the third paragraph should talk about the difference between teaching and learning in terms of period. D, I'll want you in the next paragraph, you talk about the difference between teaching and learning in the light of effort. And lastly, but not least, this is the fifth paragraph. Look at the difference between teaching and learning in terms of motivation. And this, unless you give us five paragraphs, you will not have passed this question. So, what is the difference between teaching and learning in terms of definition of teaching and learning? So, this is what you are supposed to say. That teaching can be defined as the act of giving lessons on a subject to a class or learners, while learning is used in the sense of acquiring knowledge, skills, and attitudes. When you want to give us the definition of teaching and learning in terms of performer, say that teaching is performed by the teacher and the learner, and learning is performed by the student or the learner. What about period? In another paragraph, you must explain that teaching does not take place throughout a person's life, but learning is a process that takes place throughout the lifespan of an individual. What about effort? In another paragraph, I call upon you to tell us that in most occasions, teaching is a conscious effort, while learning can, can be both conscious or unconscious. There are many times that you people will learn without knowing that you are learning. For example, I told you in our previous class that some of you, when you came to university, you were good boys and good girls. But look at the person you are becoming. Some of you have already learned to go to discos, and your parents don't know. They hardly know this. Some of you have learned to smoke or to drink. This is learning that is taking place unconsciously. And lastly, you can give us a paragraph that is talking about the distinction between learning and teaching in terms of motivation. So, for learning, motivation can come from within the individual, and this is the so called intrinsic motivation, or it can also come from external factors, and this is what we refer to as extrinsic motivation. But what about teaching? Teaching by another individual requires external motivation. For example, teachers are paid to teach by Teacher Service Commission. And what are we doing? I'm also teaching, although I'm lecturing. It is part of teaching. And I'm being paid. I'm not doing it for free. My friends, having said that, allow me to end this lesson. I know you are tired, but tomorrow we can also have another class whereby I'll be talking about formal, informal, and non-formal education. Tomorrow I'll be talking about what? Formal, informal, and formal, informal, and non-formal learning. And this one, I'm also praying that it comes in your exams. So I think Demo, if I'm not wrong, the class rep, you will have to remind me to have another class with you online in the evening. Kindly do. There are only few, a handful of you. These are 54 people who are attending this lesson. They will be surprised. Now, these are people who have not subscribed to this, and they will never, they have not been informed that we have a class. Kindly, if you have not yet subscribed, look at the button where you have been told to subscribe. Touch on that button. You will have subscribed so that anytime we have a class, you will always be notified. So touch on it. Thank you very much. Continue being good students, attending classes. Tomorrow we shall talk about formal, non-formal, and informal learning. Thank you. Have a good evening. Have good supper. Thank you for whatever you are telling me. I'm getting your feedback, and that is very okay. That is very okay. Now have a nice supper.